The corporate buzz of the office had always been a monotonous soundtrack to Paul Dawson's life, but today, the usual hum of conversations and clicking keyboards was overshadowed by a chorus of whispers and stifled laughter. The air was thick with something more than just office gossip. There was a tangible sense of disbelief. Paul, a mid-level manager at a bustling advertising agency, had always believed himself to be a respected figure in the workplace. His wife, Emily, was known to most of his colleagues, charming and sociable. She often dropped by to have lunch with him. Their marriage, in the eyes of everyone, seemed harmonious. As he approached the back room to retrieve some files, a peculiar noise halted him. It wasn't the squeak of the old storage shelves or the familiar hum of the air conditioner. It was something, or rather, someone, banging against what sounded like a door. Curiosity piqued, Paul pressed his ear against the cool metal door of the back room. The muffled sounds now unmistakable, the rhythmic thumping of a heavy object against wood, intertwined with low moans. His heart sank as a woman's laugh, unmistakably Emily's, pierced through the cacophony. The door was locked. Confusion twisted into a sharp panic as he pounded on the door, shouting, "Emily? Is everything okay?" The noises halted abruptly. Whispers followed, and then the sound of scrambling. The lock clicked, and the door swung open violently, off its hinges. The sight before Paul was grotesque, not just the betrayal, but the raw, visual confirmation of it. Emily, disheveled and flushed, stood beside the janitor, Mark, who awkwardly tried to adjust his uniform. The room, a small, forgotten space filled with old marketing posters and unused office supplies, was a mess, much like the shattered remains of Paul's trust. "Paul. It's not what it looks like," Emily stammered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and guilt. But it was exactly what it looked like. The office had quieted, faces peered from around corners and over cubicles. Paul, feeling a mixture of humiliation and rage, found himself at a loss for words. He stared at his wife, then at Mark, and back at his wife. "Save it, Emily." His voice was cold, steadier than he felt. "We're done here." As Paul turned to leave, the murmurs of his colleagues felt like daggers. He knew revenge wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. To reclaim his dignity, to prove his worth, Emily would have to understand the depth of his betrayal. He walked out of the office that day, not just planning to sever ties with Emily, but to dismantle the life they had built together, piece by piece. This wasn't just the end of his marriage, it was the beginning of his retaliation. As the office door clicked shut behind him, the real planning began. How do you break someone who has broken you? Paul knew the answer would come to him, and when it did, Emily would regret the day she decided to betray him. The intrigue of his revenge was only just beginning. Paul's drive home was a blur of red tail lights and the dull hum of traffic. The image of Emily and Mark together replayed in his mind, each recollection a sharp twist of the knife already lodged deep in his heart. By the time he reached his driveway, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that mirrored the darkness swirling within him. He sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He needed a plan, not just a reaction. Revenge had to be calculated, precise. As he entered the house, the silence was suffocating. It was the silence of absence, of betrayal. He moved through the rooms, each filled with memories, now tainted. When he reached the bedroom, he saw Emily's jewelry box on the dresser. An idea sparked in his mind. The next morning, Paul started by securing a meeting with a private investigator. The PI was a gruff man named Carl, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. They met in a dimly lit coffee shop downtown. "I need everything you can find on her, financial records, communications, movements." "I want to know if this was the first time," Paul said, his voice a mix of determination and disdain. "You got it," Carl replied, scribbling notes into a small, worn notebook. "Anything specific you looking for?" "Patterns. Anything out of place." "I want to know her secrets," Paul said, the last word tasting bitter. As Carl set to work, Paul took his next steps. He visited a lawyer to discuss the possibilities of divorce and the legal ramifications of Emily's infidelity. The lawyer, a meticulous and somewhat cynical woman named Ms. Patel, laid out his options. You have grounds for a fault-based divorce, which could be advantageous for you, especially in financial settlements, Ms. Patel explained, her eyes scanning the legal texts that lined her office walls. Paul nodded, absorbing every detail. He wanted to strip Emily of everything they shared, leaving her with as little as possible. It was harsh, cruel even, but he felt it was justified. Meanwhile, Emily tried to reach him repeatedly, calls, texts, voicemails. Her voice cracked with desperation. Paul, please, let's talk about this. I know I made a mistake, but I love you. But her words were empty to him now. He deleted each message, a cold resolve settling in. When he finally responded, it was through a text, talking won't fix what you broke. Lawyer will contact you. Days passed, and Carl came back with a report. Not only had Emily been unfaithful with Mark, but there were others, traces of nights spent away, mysterious expenses. It painted a picture of deceit Paul had never imagined. Armed with this information, Paul felt a bitter satisfaction. He met with Ms. Patel again, presenting the findings. We can use this. It strengthens your case significantly, she said, her voice measured, knowing the emotional weight of the situation. Paul left her office with a clear plan. The divorce proceedings would be initiated, and he would fight for everything. His revenge was becoming reality, but it was just the beginning. The real satisfaction would come when Emily realized the magnitude of what she had lost, not just a husband, but everything they had built together. As he drove back home, the city lights flickered like distant stars, cold and remote. He was on this path now, one of retribution, and there was no turning back. As the divorce proceedings began to unfold, Paul threw himself into his work with a renewed fervor. Each success at the office felt like another point scored against Emily, another step away from the life they had shared. Meanwhile, Emily's attempts to reconcile became increasingly desperate, her messages now filled with pleas and apologies. One evening, as Paul was leaving the office, his phone buzzed. It was Carl, the private investigator. Got something new you might want to see, Carl's gravelly voice said, a hint of intrigue in his tone. Meet me at the usual spot in 30, Paul responded, curiosity piqued. At the coffee shop, Carl slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs and documents. She's been siphoning money from your joint accounts for months. Small amounts, frequent enough to add up. Paul's eyes narrowed as he scanned the documents. How deep does this go? Deep enough. There's more. She's been meeting with someone. Not the janitor, someone else. Looks like a financial advisor, or maybe a lover who's smarter with money. A plan began to form in Paul's mind, a way to use this information to not only win the divorce, but to cripple Emily financially and socially. He thanked Carl and drove home, his mind racing. The next day, Paul made an appointment with his bank to secure his assets and ensure Emily could no longer access any of their joint accounts. Armed with evidence of her financial deceit, the bank moved swiftly. Paul also called Ms. Patel to update her on the new findings. This changes our strategy, she noted, meticulously marking up their legal documents. We'll push for full disclosure of her finances in court. It could sway the settlement heavily in your favor. As the legal gears ground on, Paul used the extra time to solidify his standing at work, proposing new project ideas and networking with upper management. His personal life might be in shambles, but he would not let his professional life suffer. One afternoon, Paul was surprised by a knock at his door. It was Emily, face tear-streaked, eyes red. Can we talk? She pleaded, looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Paul hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in, curiosity edging out his resolve for a moment. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Paul, I'm so sorry. I was stupid, I was selfish, Emily began, her voice quivering. I want to make things right. I'll do anything. Paul studied her, his expression unreadable. Why should I believe you now, Emily? I know I've ruined everything. But I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want more lawyers, more hatred. Can't we just end this quietly? Paul shook his head slowly. You broke everything we had. You betrayed me, not just with Mark, but all this. He gestured to the document on the table detailing her financial deceit. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. Emily's face fell, her hope extinguished. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure you leave this marriage with nothing, Paul said coldly. That's what you've earned. As Emily left, her defeat was palpable. But for Paul, the victory felt hollow. He realized that his path of revenge might restore his pride and his finances, but it would not repair the emptiness inside him. Yet, he was too far along to turn back now. The intrigue of his revenge kept him moving forward, one calculated step after another, into an uncertain and cold future. As the day of the final divorce hearing approached, Paul's once clear-cut plan had evolved into something far more complex and punishing. He had turned his life and focus towards a singular purpose, to ensure Emily's downfall was absolute. His preparations were meticulous, leaving no stone unturned. The courtroom was somber, the air thick with anticipation. Emily sat across the aisle, her face pale, her eyes avoiding his. Paul sat confidently, files and evidence neatly organized beside him, Miss Patel whispering last-minute strategies in his ear. The proceedings began with a rigid formality. Emily's lawyer tried to paint a picture of reconciliation and regret, emphasizing her willingness to settle amicably. Paul watched, a cold smile playing on his lips, knowing the blow he was about to deliver. When it was his turn, Miss Patel rose, her voice steady and sharp. Your Honor, we have undeniable proof of Mrs. Dawson's financial misconduct and infidelity. We request severe repercussions and full financial disclosure. As the evidence unfolded, Emily's face went from pale to ashen. Bank statements, photographs, testimonies from Carl, all laid bare for the court to see. The judge's frown deepened with each revelation. Then, Paul took the stand, his voice calm but filled with a venomous undertone. I trusted her with my life, my love, my livelihood. She betrayed me at every turn. This wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a calculated betrayal. The judge nodded solemnly, taking notes. As the hearing came to a close, the judgment was swift and brutal. Emily was left with almost nothing, her financial deceptions turning the case heavily against her. But Paul wasn't finished. Outside the courthouse, Emily confronted him, tears streaking her cheeks. Paul, you've taken everything. What more do you want? Paul's smile was chilling. It's not over yet, Emily. You see, I made sure everyone would know the truth about you. Confusion clouded her face until her phone buzzed. Then another buzz, and another. Messages, calls, emails, all pouring in. Paul had released the evidence of her affairs and financial deceit to her friends, family, and colleagues. Her social life, like her financial state, was in ruins. You ruined me, Paul, she whispered, the fight gone from her voice. I did what you did to me, he replied coldly. As he turned to leave, a man approached him. Mr. Dawson? I'm Detective Miles. I'm afraid I need to talk to you. Paul frowned. About what? It seems there are some irregularities with the evidence submitted. We have reason to believe some of the material may have been falsified. The ground seemed to shift beneath Paul's feet. Falsified? Impossible. He had been so careful. As they talked, it became clear. Someone had played him. The deeper investigations into the evidence had revealed inconsistencies, evidence tampered with, perhaps even by Carl, his trusted investigator, to push the divorce outcome in a certain direction. The realization hit Paul like a wave. In his quest for revenge, he had become the architect of his own downfall. Now facing legal repercussions himself, his victory was hollowed out by the taste of his own betrayal. Emily watched him being led away, a complex mix of satisfaction and sorrow clouding her face. As Paul looked back, their eyes met one last time, a mutual recognition of destruction between them. They had ruined each other, their hatred of betrayal eclipsing all the love they once shared. The final chapter of their lives closed not with reconciliation, but with the harsh gavel of retributive justice, leaving both to face their separate, broken futures.